Good morning, everybody from India. My name is Pramod Nayar. I teach English at the University of Hyderabad, India. And hello to everybody at Cosmea 2020. When I was asked to speak about my research connected to the theme of the Cosmea 2020 festivities, the end of the world, my instinctive reaction was to say I'll speak on post-humanism, in which I have done some work for a substantial period of time now, and whether it means the end of the world or the end of the human as we know it is an arguable point. I got interested in questions of post-humanism because of the work of Octavia Butler and her interest in modified humans. And my early work did account for a lot of fiction by Octavia Butler, but also artists like Stelarc and Orlan, who were exploring the ways in which the human can transcend corporeal limitations. And my early work, which appeared in 2004 in a book called Virtual Worlds, did account for the arrival of the post-human. And that book had sections on Stelarc and Orlan and the reinvention of the human form in certain kinds of artistic endeavors and projects. Eventually, I moved on to looking at Octavia Butler's fiction, and primarily to do with her Xenogenesis trilogy, the last novel she wrote, Fledgling, and the making of what I thought of as species cosmopolitanism, which was to do with the merger of the human species with other life forms to bring into being a hybridized form of life, part human, part something else. And the end of the world, the end of the human, the end of species classifications, which people like Donna Haraway have theorized for a very long period of time, and thereby giving us a field to work in. Much of the work that appears in post-humanism, including my own, owes huge debts to the work of Neil Badminton, Donna Haraway, Rosie Braidotti, and others. What I found interesting was when people like Butler were theorizing the end of the human, they were also thinking in terms of different models of humanity. For instance, her creation of hyper-empaths, people who are hyper-empathetic towards pain and suffering, fascinated me. And this is, of course, also spilling over into what contemporary scholars like Nick Bostrom speak of as transhumanism. But that's a different trajectory, and that's not something I have explored in much detail. I was also interested in work like Never Let Me Go, Ishiguro's novel. Both Butler and Ishiguro, from what I have seen and worked with, and I've published on both, were writing science fiction without the science. But they were also in the process questioning the ethics of science, putting on display controversies and debates, including those on cloning, those on the creation of forms of life which will serve as human cadavers for the rest of the race to source organs from, which is, of course, the premise of Never Let Me Go. I was also interested in projects such as the Human Genome Project, on which I have published, and personal genome databasing, which is now an industry, including in India, and the forms of belonging and kinship that these projects entail, discovering that your genetic kin is on the other side of the world, and that people you thought were your next of kin and people whom you thought were distant from you, the links, the genetic links, producing a form of genetic determinism, are what reconstitute and reconfigure ideas of belonging. I have also looked at popular Hollywood films like Repo Man, young adult and popular fiction like Nini Holmquist's The Unit, Neil Shusterman's Unwind, Jodi Picoult's My Sister's Keeper, texts that speak about organ transplantation. And here I have looked at the question of post-human bodies, bodies kept alive through machines, bodies whose organs are no longer connected to themselves but are shared. Again, Never Let Me Go comes to the fore. And I have been interested in works like Jean-Luc Nancy's The Intruder, where he does speak about organs alien to ourselves, organs shared with others, organs connected to and kept alive through machines and a network and apparatus of medical facilities. And in all of these, I have looked at, when I was dealing with xenotransplantation, also in a forthcoming essay, questions of biocapitalism and the bioeconomies, which revolve around the making capital out of organs from blood to genetic material. So if you were to think in terms of what I have looked at so far, I have looked at post-human bodies, and in my book on post-humanism, I have traced a kind of genealogy of the post-human, including animal studies, critical disability studies, and other intellectual roots. I've looked at popular culture and its representation of what Carey Wolf and others will characterize as popular post-humanism, but also I have looked at critical post-humanism via the lens offered to us by Donna Haraway and others. I have looked at companion species and multi-species belonging in Octavia Butler. I've looked at genetic belonging. I've looked at the anxiety over human evolution and species cosmopolitanism, whether we are headed towards a situation where our boundaries as humans are increasingly blurred, breached, so that we evolve into a new form of life symbiotically, as Octavia Butler would theorize in her fiction via the work of Lynn Margulis and others, to think in terms of a species cosmopolitanism, that we are more than ourselves, we are other than ourselves. And therefore the question of who belongs, how we belong, what are our borders as humans have concerned me. To me, one of the key questions to be asked about the end of the world as we think about it is, what does it mean to speak of the end of humanity as we understand it? Considering this is the time of the pandemic and everybody is talking about via somebody like Priscilla Wald, contagion cultures, of the breach of human borders and human corporeal, but also human social, national, community borders, what forms of life will emerge to thrive in such contexts? What forms of life will survive in certain kinds of contexts? Would the end of the world mean the end of the world as we understand it, dominated by humans, the Anthropocene, or does the end of the world mean the beginning of something else? So the end of the world might perhaps be qualified as the end of the world as we have defined, determined, let's say ruined it, and does it mark a new beginning? That remains to be seen. And I think the work of people like Octavia Butler do offer us, although there is a certain problematic return to colonial discourses about colonizing other planets in Octavia Butler's work as well, but the idea of improved humans, the idea of humans improved in the sense a moral transhumanism, as Julian Savulescu and others have been talking about. Does the improved human mean a more empathetic human? Does it mean a more compassionate human? So the end of the world, does it mark the end of the older forms of humanness? Does it involve a change in the bioeconomies and biocapitalism that has defined the human control over bodies? Bodies by which I mean plant life, animals, but also certain kinds of bodies, whether it is the black body or the yellow body or the diseased body. Biocapitalism and bioeconomies have thrived on these. So in my work, I have looked at fictional, popular, and other instantiations of the post-human, and I'm not sure I have addressed either in my published work or even in this current brief talk or introduction whether I have addressed the end of the world as Cosmio puts it, but I'm certainly interested in whether the end of the world / the end of the human marks the arrival of a new form of human. Whether that can be termed improved or more evolved, that remains to be seen. That's all I have to say for now, and much of my work is available on websites, Academy and Google, and I wish Cosmio 2020 all success. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting conversation.